I'm starting. Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Tet of Sefer Yeshayahu. And where we are in right now is still during the time of Achaz. He is the father of Chizkiyahu. When Achaz became king, we know this from Malachim Bet, Perek Yud Chet, Pasuk Yud Bet, Chizkiyahu Hamel, the future Chizkiyahu Hamel, his son Chizkiyahu was already born. He was 9 years old at the time Achaz took over. And so Chizkiyahu is a personality already in part of this Nevuah, a significant one. The way this Nevuah is structured, actually, there are two major parts to the Perek. The first starts from the beginning until Pasuk Zayin. In that period, what we're talking about is the salvation, the joy that will come from the salvation at the destruction of our enemies. The second piece will come a little bit talking about the Davidic dynasty being firmly established, and then we're going to get into 4 rebukes, 4 tochachot. And the tochachot are actually going to take us from this Perek into the next Perek. And for some reason, when this was divided as chapters by the church, they didn't include all 4 into one chapter itself. They only included 3 into this chapter. It's hard to imagine, but what's fascinating about this tochacha is it's written with a refrain. And so just to jump for a moment, if you would, to Pasuk Yud Aleph, just to give you that context, if you look in verse 11, you'll see that at the end of the pasuk it says, "B'chol zot lo shav apo." Nevertheless, God's anger hadn't subsided, v'od yato netuya, and his arm is still outstretched. And the reason we know is b'chol zot is because the Jews had not returned; they'd not done shuvah. That refrain is going to be repeated 4 times. So there's actually a rebuke that's written in stanzas, which will hit 3 of the stanzas in this Perek, and the 4th stanza is the beginning of the following Perek. You'll see that very same phrase of the b'chol zot lo shav apo. You'll see that in Pasuk Yud Aleph, Pasuk Tet Zayin, Pasuk Chaf, and then again in Pasuk Dalet. That's the background of where we are. We are in the monarchy of Achaz. Achaz was evil. Chizkiyahu will be great. Chizkiyahu will be great, and yet he will miss out on an opportunity. We'll talk about that as well. And the pasuk begins, Ha'am ha'olchim b'choshech, the nation that is now walking in darkness. Darkness, in the sense, is the darkness that we're talking about of despair. Rashi in the Radak talks about this is already prophesying about what will be in the time of Chizkiyahu. If you recall, Ashur is threatening the south. Originally, and this goes back to the battles we had talked about, the northern kingdom under Pekach ben Remaliah and Aram and the Arameans under Ritzin were trying to get the southern kingdom to join with them in an alliance to hold off Ashur. This was in the time of Achaz. Achaz, instead of going that route, and despite the warnings of Yeshayahu, chose to create alliances with Ashur and Mitzrayim. He chose, in other words, to bypass, feeling that he could pay off the people who threatened him, and by paying off the people who threatened him, he would be safe. He discovers that this is a temporary solution at best, and as a result, long term, what happens is Ashur not only exiles the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, but also decimates Yehuda and threatens, in the time of his son Chizkiyahu, Yerushalayim, laying siege around Yerushalayim itself. All of those things are happening, and when that period of time, when Yehuda is decimated and Yerushalayim is being threatened, that is the choshech. That's the darkness of despair that Rashi and Radak are referring to. This is the fear of Sancheriv himself. Sancheriv went ahead, and this was by the 14th year of Chizkiyahu Melech, is when Sancheriv is going to attack. We read about it in Melachim Bet, Yud Gimel, Yud Chet, Pasuk Yud Gimel, and then Ra'u Or Gadol. However, those who had once been in that darkness saw the great light. Yoshvei Ba'aretz Tzalmavet, those who had been living in the land of Tzalmavet. Tzalmavet is a contraction of two words, of Tzel and Mavet, the shadow of death. They, or Nagalehem, the light is going to shine upon them. So this is a prophecy of great hope. Hirbita Hagoy, lo higdalta hasimcham. In this kind of case, you have been made great. Hirbita Hagoy, God, you have caused this nation to be great. Julius Hirsch points out that, interestingly, Hagoy is referring, obviously, to the Jewish people. Remember, in biblical language, Goy is not a non-Jew, Goy is a nation. But still, it's a little unusual when we refer to the Jewish people. Why doesn't it Hirbita Yisrael, Hirbita Yaakov? Why specifically Goy? So Julius Hirsch points out that what you have done, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this follows Rashi's approach, you have made the Jews great in the eyes of the nations of the world. They are a nation that is respected by others at this point from what has happened. Lo higdalta hasimcha. To him, okay, you have made great the joy. Now, there is a fascinating Kri Uchtiv here. If you notice, the way the text reads is with a Lamed Aleph. The way we read it, it's one of about 15 cases like this, as if it's a Lamed Vav, to him, as opposed to not. The way the text reads, Lo higdalta hasimcha, you have not made great the joy, a Lamed Aleph, and as a result, the Medrash picks up on this. It talks about the fact that lo higdalta simcha, that perhaps it is not an absolute joy. And in fact, the first possibility, which Rashi introduces, is we also see in Yeshayahu Lamed Tet, later on, Lamed Tet Vav, Hinei yamim ba'im v'nasa kol asher b'veitecha, that Chizkiyahu had to empty out the treasuries. So while they were saved from destruction, the destruction, that salvation came at an extraordinary cost. So lo higdalta simcha is the way the Medrash talks about it. On the other hand, the lo, the Lamed Vav, is to him you have made great the simcha. There is also, at this very same time, lo higdalta simcha, a shade, and we'll get into it, of a famous Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph, which says, Bikesh HaKadosh Baruch Hu lasot Chizkiyahu Mashiach. That Chizkiyahu was destined to have been the Messiah, and at the very same time, Sancheriv was destined to be Gog uMagog, to be Armageddon, those battles. And unfortunately, that didn't occur. We'll see in a moment. Lefanecha kesimchat bakatzer. And it is, I'm sorry, Samachu lefanecha kesimchat bakatzer. Samchu lefanecha, the Radak says, it's actually a mitzvah to do the simcha lefanecha in the Beit HaMikdash, because simchat HaKatzir. Simchat HaKatzir is a fascinating kind of simcha. The simchat HaKatzir is the harvest, the rejoicing over harvest. And on this, Jacob Jaffe, in his recently published commentary on Yeshayahu, he's the headmaster of Maimonides in Boston. He has a beautiful piece on this. He says, if you want to understand what absolute joy is, that's the joy of the farmer at the point of harvest, because the farmer does everything he can to make sure he'll be successful. And yet there's no guarantee that he'll be successful. And so when everything happens just right, that's an extraordinary kind of joy, because not everything is in his control. Here, this is the kind of joy they're going to have, that joy, that extraordinary joy of a katsir, of that. Yeah, Leah, you had a question?
When you said that Sancheriv was destined to be Gog uMagog, is that a passive designation based on the action of the Jews, or is it is that something that's separate from our usual enemies?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
No, you said that.
No, I understand what I said. I know what I said, but
so he was destined to be like.
In other words, what would happen? What?
Mashiach.
Right. So what Chazal were saying was that the ultimate redemption of Mashiach, the third Beit HaMikdash, the permanent Beit HaMikdash, because the second, the first was still standing at this point. The ultimate and eternal Beit HaMikdash would have been at the time of Chizkiyahu. So what do you do with the prophecies of destruction of Armageddon? That, Chazal say, that destruction of Armageddon we experienced with the destruction that Sancheriv brought. if he was Mashiach, what do you do with Armageddon? We have it. We have those two pieces together in those two pieces of the puzzle, and therefore we can have the Geula, the ultimate redemption. Does that end? Okay. So on this, Kasher Yagilu Bechalkam Shalal, and they'll rejoice just as they would rejoice when you are dividing up the spoils of war. Now, interestingly, Rashi goes even a step further, quoting from the Medrash, Kasher Yagilu Bechalkam Shalal. He's looking for a point where there has been this distribution of Shalal, of the spoils, and he refers back to the spoils of Egypt that were distributed after Kriyat Yamsuf. After, if you recall, after the Egyptian army was drowned at the splitting of the sea, all of the jewels and all of the precious things that they had brought with them washed up ashore, and the Jewish people divided it up among themselves. Now, what's the connection between Mitzrayim and between this salvation from Assyria, from Sancheriv? The Medrash explains very simply that Ashur had also attacked Mitzrayim. See, the Jews were actually always caught in the crossfire. The Assyrians, as far as the Assyrians were concerned, Judea was this little dinky outpost. It just happened to be along the way. In order to get to Mitzrayim, the other great empire of the time, and to create world domination, what you have to do is you have to pass through along the Fertile Crescent and through Eretz Yisrael. And so they had gone, and they had already, the Assyrian armies had much of the spoils from Egypt. And therefore, when they're overturned, what's being divided up are not just spoils of the Assyrians, but the spoils of the Egyptians. And that's the way the Medrash connects these two historical points, even though they were different times. Ki et ol subalo vet matei shichmo. And the piece continues because the yoke of his burden. Okay, what Chizkiyahu had a burden, and remember, his burden was he was paying tribute taxes to Assyria to try to hold them off, as Achaz, his father, had begun. And also the Mateh Shichmo, that which was on his shoulder. In other words, literally that the cross piece of wood that connects the two oxen is that piece, that which was he was bearing. And Shevet HaNoges, and also the Nogesbo, the rod, the rod that a person would be hitting him with. This is the person who's the oppressor. All of those things. Hachitota kiyom midyan. You, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, have destroyed it, have broken it, like the day of Midyan. Now, the day of Midyan, the Navi is referring back to another great historical event. This is the story of Gidon. If you remember, back in Sefer Shoftim, Perek Zion, we talk about Gidon, who was one of the great leaders, a bit controversial, who brought together just 300 people, just 300 soldiers, to attack Midian, or to defend the Jews against the attack of Midian. The armies of Midian in the Psukim there are described that Shein Mispar Kechol Hayam. They were immeasurable. The numbers of soldiers that these 300 people went up against was immeasurable, and nevertheless, they were successful through a miraculous, or through a very clever kind of trick, to create this tumult where Midian just ran away. It was the battle that was won without bloodshed. Similarly, if we recall in the story of Chizkiyahu and Sancheriv, when Sancheriv surrounds the city, they ultimately disappear, and the armies are gone, and the siege is won. Basically, the siege is overturned without any bloodshed as well. So he's saying that what's going to happen in Chizkiyahu's time bears some resemblance to the miraculous salvation in the time of Gidon. Now, why is this creation happening? It must have been that battle of Gidon was something that was so well known by people, that this was something that it wasn't just in Sefer Shoftim, it was within the consciousness of the Jewish people. Whenever they had to deal with an enemy, they always thought about, I'll put it this way, they always thought about, if only we could succeed like what happened in Gidon, if only HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be on our side like he was in Gidon, if only this battle could be won without any bloodshed. All of this is where he's talking about. Ki kol sa'on so'en berash, because all of the sa'on. Now, sa'on is noise, like sha'on, like with a shin, okay, and the noise of battle. Now, the Dat Mikram has an interesting theory of why the word sha'on is the noise of battle. And he says it doesn't come from the word sha'on. He says it comes from the Aramaic cognate to it, which is sanya. Sanya are shoes. Okay, in Aramaic, that's how you say a shoe in Aramaic. And he says, therefore, what it means is the sounds of the marching army. Those armies, he calls so'on bera'ash, v'simla megolela b'damim, and their clothing, in essence, was encircled with blood. And despite all of the noise and the tumult of war, they were destroyed like a srefa. There wasn't, when destroyed with fire, in other words, it was something miraculous without the normal battle itself. Now we get into Pasuk Hey. Now, Pasuk Hey in the Christian church is very significant to them. It is one of those Psukim in Yeshayahu that they misuse. And it's like we did before with the Alama, which they translate as virgin, and we translate as a young girl. And here, Yeled, Ki Yeled Yulad Lanu, Ben Nitan Lanu, a son is born to us. A boy is given to us. Now you hear the Christological references to it. The only problem is, and the answers to these kinds of claims of these psukim, first of all, it takes it outside of context. This is all talking about the salvation at the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. It's talking to Achaz. It is hundreds of years before the birth of Yeshu. But even more than that, and this is the great theological piece, they keep on talking about their Savior being born, but we have certain prereqs for the Savior. Okay, the Savior is born, wars are ended, there's a peaceful existence, and unfortunately, when their Savior was born, wars were initiated, and we've had everything but peaceful existence. So it really doesn't work for us in any way, shape, or form. It's not a great challenge to us. But if they want to take a pasuk out of context, they have to have a nice time. They can do it. It doesn't challenge us in any way. Vatehi hamisra l'shichmo, and he will have the rule or the authority on his shoulders. Now, the Radak says this is political authority. This child who has been born, who was born to us, this is Puel, the child who was born to us, this child will have the authority. In other words, he's going to be the next leader. According to Rashi, he's actually going to have the religious leadership. It's talking about the Misrav HaKodesh Baruch Hu. According to the Radak, it's the political leadership. Vayikra Shmo, and his name will be Pele Yoetz, the wondrous counsel, Kel Gibor, the Almighty God, Avi Ad, the everlasting Father, Sar Shalom, the officer of peace. Now, there's a number of different things that are taking place here. First of all, let's just talk about what this prophecy is to Achaz. Achaz is an evil king. We know that. Achaz is being told by the Navi, you have a son has been born. Okay, this is Chizkiyahu, his son. His son Chizkiyahu is born, and he is going to be taking over for you. For an evil king, or for any king, to hear that his son will succeed him is a great source of comfort. Because in the north, what's taking place at the very same time is there are constantly, dynasties are 2, 3, 4 kings long, and then they're being overturned. Pekach ben Remaliah will be murdered. Hoshea will be taking over after him, and he'll be a puppet king in the north. For Achaz to hear this is a great source of comfort. You're going to have a son. That's step number 1. But step number 2 is, what's his name? And there's a machloket. There is a machloket. The Ibn Ezra says that these are the names of Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu is going to be called Pele Yoetz. He's going to be called Kel Gibor, or he'll be called El Gibor, which is a powerful. If we say El is a person, then it's a powerful man of strength. Aviad, the Father, the Eternal Father, the Sar Shalom, the person of peace. That's the way the Ibn Ezra takes it. Most of the Meforshim disagree. Rashi in the lead, of course, and most of them say no. Vayikra Shemo, and God will call him the God who is a Pele Yoetz, who is a Kel Gibor, who is a Vi'ad, those first 6 words are referring to God in his actions, the descriptors of God, and the name of the child will be Sar Shalom, the child of peace. Now again, if this child is being born and the child is a peaceful child, that's by itself in this one pasuk is enough to destroy the Christological uses of this pasuk. But that's what he's going to be. I'm sorry, there was a question I saw somewhere. Yeah.
How does the Yeshayahu describe this? Do they also use those names?
I'm-
Do the Christians also tap into?
Yeah, I don't think there's a parallel verse in this in Divrei Yomim.
But
Okay.
the Christians use the Yeshayahu as
I don't know it well enough. I can check if they use Divrei Yomim. I'm not sure if they're using Divrei Yomim. Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, they really like a lot, but I can check the other sources as well. But here, Sar Shalom is going to be the way that the Chizkiyahu Melech is referred to. Now, the next pasuk Vav, starts in a very unusual way. If you notice, okay, the word is Lamarbe. Okay, now Lamarbe is written in a very strange way. There's a mem sofit after the lamed. Now, on the one hand, scholars will say, now, and this is not necessarily the frum scholars, they'll say, listen, the idea of otiot sofiot was something that was developed over the period of time. Early versions of language didn't necessarily have those 4 final letters. And the 4 final letters, sometimes they appear in the middle. We find actually sometimes with a letter that shouldn't be a final at the end. There should be a final that is a non-final at the end as well. We find both, and they'll say, don't get too worked up about it, okay? We get worked up about it, okay? And because the reason we get worked up about it is we're trying to figure out 2 things. If you look in the text, and I hope yours is the same as mine, it's actually presented as 2 words. Lamed Mem, and then Rabbe. Do you have it in the same in your text? You have 1 word. Interesting. Okay. You have it as 1 word. So, yeah. As a single word. Yeah. So, right. So there is. So first of all, there is a machloket. Is it 1 word or is it 2 words? If we say it's 2 words, by the way you could translate the lamed mem is not that a mem sofit's in the wrong place. It's lamed mem. Lamed mem is lahem, like lamo, which we have in Hebrew. And so it could be lahem, to them, Rabbah HaMisra. The authority is great. Okay? According to them, so we're talking about the future leadership of Chizkiyahu and his people, okay? That's one way of saying it, solves it real easily, but most approaches take this, and this goes back to that Gemara in Sanhedrin. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, as I mentioned earlier, was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make Chizkiyahu Mashiach, he wanted to make Sancheriv, Gog and Magog, but because at the time of the battle, back in Malachim Bet, when we read about that battle with Sancheriv, after the victory, after the Assyrian armies disappeared, Sancheriv didn't sing Shira. He didn't. Chizkiyahu, I'm sorry. Chizkiyahu didn't sing Shira over his salvation, and as a result, he was punished. Now, the mem, therefore, what does it mean? Okay, the mem is specifically closing off opportunity, according to one explanation, meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to do this, Chizkiyahu missed the opportunity. He blew it, it was closed from him. The other possibility is that Chizkiyahu's mouth was closed when it should have been open. Okay. Third, you'll find this all within the Meforshim on the page. The third, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to close the enemies from us, to put away the enemies from us. All of these different possibilities, there's even more possibilities you'll find on lists, you'll find them in the Mikras Gedos, that Mikra brings them as well, but this Mem Sofit is there for purpose to make a point. Yeah.
This is written. How did you articulate it when you spoke it?
Lamarbet.
No. Yeshayahu.
Yeah.
How did he incorporate this?
No, so
in the speech,
right,
when it's really, you can only discern it
when it's written.
a written letter.
Mhm. Yeah. So he did it. In the essence, that's what we're learning out of it. But that's also true, by the way, on all the Kriyoch thieves. Okay, on all the Kriyoch thieves, unless if you're going to take the approach of Kriyoch thief, which is supported by some, but it's a minority opinion, that the Kriyoch thieves came out of variants that existed or trying to clean up language that was a little too shocking for people to hear. Those who take the approach that Kriyoch thief are from the beginning, you have the same issue. How do you see it? So that's why, by the way, the sanctity of the book as well. Yeah.
But not necessarily.
Not at that moment. That
Yeah,
moment.
you
By the way,
figure out what
at
they're
that moment, and we exactly as it's presented in the text. Remember, it's not always precisely that same thing that may have been said. There may have been some differences when it was written down as well. These are the nevuot. He had this the way he wrote it, but we're not really sure of all the conversation that took place. The classic example of that, for example, is, remember back to Megillat Esther, where we know that all of those conversations that took place didn't take place in Hebrew. Okay, they took place in some other language, and as a result, they were translated and retold by Mordechai and Esther when they wrote the book. So it's a problem, and it's a problem of what may have been missing, or maybe Yeshayahu may have gone a little more explicit on things that he didn't find the necessity to do. La marbeh misra u'leshalom ein ketz. And there's going to be great amount of authority and the peace. There's going to be immeasurable al kisei David val mamlachto, on the seat of David and over his reign. It is going to be prepared. It's going to be established with righteousness and justice from now and forever. Kinat Hashem tzvakot tasezot. The zealousness of God. Now, it's interesting that Rashi says the kina is l'tzion, al asher ya'atz aleh aram. God is zealous for Zion and redeems Zion. Hirsch says you need to understand that kina, that this term, the word kina, talks about standing up for what is right. When kina is used for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it means that he is the master of all creation forever. When he stands up, he makes a statement of eternity. And that's the kina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so according to Hirsch, kinat Hashem tzvakot taseh zot, it is the eternity of God that is creating this peace and this authority within the Jewish people. That's the first half, or the first part, and not really a half, about a third of this parak. And with this, we end. Now, this piece is, again, a nevuah. The nevuah comes to Achaz and, by extension, to his son Yechizkiyahu, that they will be saved. They will be saved, and there will be future for the Davidic dynasty at this point. We understand within it, it won't be a salvation as great as it could have been, which is the great unfortunate action where Hizkiyahu didn't sing the Shira, and as a result, he wasn't the Mashiach. And now we enter into the part of the Tochacha, of the rebuke that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving this rebuke to the northern kingdoms, which is interesting because Yeshayahu is not the prophet of the north. It's a little more unusual that he's prophesying, telling the north what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing, but he's talking more to his audience in the south. There are the 4 stanzas to this rebuke. Remember, each one is going to end with that same statement of B'chol Zot lo shavapo ve'od yado netuya. Those are how each of the stanzas are done, and each of them has a different theme. This first one, which goes from Zion and until Yudalad, this first one, the theme is going to be the arrogance of the northern kingdom. And so, Davar shalach Hashem b'Yakov v'nafal b'Yisrael, that there is a Davar. Now, what is the Davar? The very simple thing, Rashi says, these words. Davar is like Dibur. It is the words, it's a prophecy that is going to be given. B'Yakov v'nafal b'Yisrael, and the Yisrael, and while it sounds parallel, there is a difference. We use the word Yaakov and Yisrael. Hirsch suggests that the parallelism is not really here, that God is going to give a warning to Yaakov. Who's Yaakov? All of the tribes, north and south. The only problem is that the north will not pay attention to what's being told, and they're going to fall, which is why Yisrael, v'nafal Yisrael, is talking about Yisrael and not Yaakov again. The Radak says that actually this davar shalach Hashem b'Yaakov is an action, are going to be the evil that is going to occur. It's not just speech, but it's actions that are going to be done, the attacks that are being made against both the north and the south. V'yad'u ha'am kulo, Ephraim v'yoshev Shomron, v'gava uvigoda levav lemor. And v'yadu, but in this case, all of them, they heard the words, but they didn't pay attention. They didn't heed to it. They didn't heed the words. V'yad'u ha'am kulo. Now, kulo, interesting, Hirsch says again, it is that they were told the entire kulo is Torah. They knew what they were supposed to be doing, the right thing. Ephraim v'yoshev Shomron, okay, both Ephraim, the northern kingdom, and those who are around the area of Shomron, b'ga'avav v'godel levav, they're haughty, and they are godel levav, they are full of themselves, I guess. It's another form of haughtiness. Arrogant, thank you. Okay, Lemor, what did they say? What was their response to the warnings or to the knowledge that they had? The response is, Levenim nafla v'gazit nimna. Okay, there's been destruction. The stones have been knocked over. We're going to take better stones. We're going to take stones that are finely hewn stones. And we'll fix it up that way. Shikmim gudau varazim nachalif. Okay, the sycamore has been uprooted, and instead we're going to replace it with cedar. Now, these are building materials, by the way. Sycamore is a cheap wood, and sycamore is not used for big buildings because sycamore is a low-lying tree. It's a very short tree. Cedar is the kind of wood that's used for the big, magnificent buildings. So what they're saying is, okay, so Ashur came in, they knocked everything down. We're going to build it better than it ever was before. That's the simple pshat of what they say. Rashi, however, says that this is actually not talking about their buildings. This is talking about their leaders. That they say, okay, Pekach will be killed. We'll get a better king in place of him. All of these things, whatever happened, we're going to make it even better. So what's happening to us now, we're not that concerned about. Vaisagev Hashem et Tzarei Ritzin alav, and God is going to strengthen Yisagev to make bigger, to make stronger. Okay, the troubles of Ratzin against him, vet oivav yisachsech, and his enemies yisachsech. Yisachsech will be spurred. They'll start up fighting with each other. Now, who's Ritzin? Remember, Ritzin is the king of Aram. Okay, so what he's saying is, who are the enemies of Aram? It's going to be Sancherib. It's Ashur. So God, at the same time, is going to make the trouble even more. God is going to strengthen the enemies of Ratzin, and therefore the hopes that they had in the previous pasuk are going to be dashed. Don't think you're going to build up any better than you had before. Now, interestingly, what the second, that's Rashi's first explanation. The second explanation of Rashi is that ultimately what's going to be is that really what's going to happen here, God is going to get all of the various forces, and they're going to start fighting among themselves. So now, when it's not just a question of Ashur, according to the second explanation of Rashi, it's also a question of the Aram themselves and the Plishtim, and we're also talking about the Jews themselves fighting among themselves. This is Yisachsech, Aram mikedem uFlishtim me'achor. Aram is going to come from the east and Plishtim from behind, which is the west. That's one way of explaining it. However, Rashi points out that Aram mikedem, that it might be, this is the first explanation in Rashi, Aram from before, B'yimei kedem, earlier in time. We're going to attack uPlishtim me'achor. And the reason why Rashi doesn't initially say that mikedem is east, remember, the reason why kedem is east, it's the place where the sun first rises. Okay, that's why Yama is where the sea is, Kedma where the sun rises, because if you look at the geography of Eretz Yisrael, you have that in Safona, for example, that's where the enemies would come, the mitzpeh, the outlook post. So you would have all of these, you have it, describing it. Rashi doesn't pick Kedem as a geographic location. He talks about it as a historical piece, because we don't see at this time of Achaz actually the attack coming from the east. The attacks were coming from the north and were coming from the west. And so Rashi has a problem with it. He takes that approach. But the problem with Rashi's first explanation is simply, how do you take two words, one be geographic and the other be Achor is geographic and Kedem being historical? It doesn't seem to be in the same phrase. You wouldn't be in the same pasuk like that. I see people getting cold. You can turn off the air conditioner. There's a little button people are. Okay, now I'm going to get not going to. Vayochlu et Yisrael b'chol peh, and they're going to devour the Jewish people b'chol peh. The Mitzudat David says this following Rashi: they're going to fulfill all of their desires by the destruction of the Jewish people. The Dat Mikra, though, has an interesting approach. The Dat Mikra says kol peh. No, they're going to devour the Jews like people who are ravenous, where they just stuff everything possible into their mouths. And that's the way they're going to destroy the Jews. B'chol zot, now comes the refrain, nevertheless, lo shav apo v'od yado netuya. God's anger has not been assuaged, and his hand is still outstretched. Why? Because the Jews didn't do tshuva. Second stanza. The second stanza is going to be talking about the leadership who misled the Jewish people at this time. Yeah, Jim.
Don't you see a contemporary correlation between this and what's going on now?
Oh.
Or see it over and over again in the Jewish history?
100%. If this doesn't have eternal value, it wouldn't be recorded in the Tanakh. That's the ultimate measure of every book of Tanakh is it something that has eternal value and meaning. So it's not, history doesn't repeat itself, but challenges are similar. Okay, to say history repeats itself is too broad of a statement. There's things that happen. Similar issues come up. It's not a repetition. Problem. And so this book can be tied into this time perfectly.
So this meets Barry's theory about how things Jews go up and Jews go down.
Oh, that's not. I don't want to take it away from Barry. It's good to have Barry back, but the reality is, Chazal talk about this. Okay, if you remember, we first encountered it also in Sefer Shemot. Okay, the Jews are doing really good, and then they start worshiping idols. Then they're attacked. Then God appoints a shofet. Then they do good. Things are cyclical in that nature. Va'am, second part, we're talking about again the leadership. Va'am lo shav ad hamakehu. The people have not done tshuva to the one who has beat them up, to God, in other words, Rashi says. The Makehu is God. Ve'et Hashem tzvakot lo darashu. And they're not seeking God in all of this. Vayachret Hashem Yisrael rosh v'zanav. And God is going to cut off the leadership of the people from the rosh to the zanav. Now, rosh and zanav, the Mitzudat David says, from the chashuvim to the shvelim, from the strong leaders to the weak leaders. Others say from the real leaders to the false leaders, top and bottom. God is going to cut us off. Both ends will get cut off. No one is going to be a leader. Even the good ones aren't going to be, the good leaders aren't going to be there. Even the bad leaders aren't going to be there anymore. There's no leadership. Kippah ve'agmon yom echad. He's going to destroy, this the Achret still applies to this, Kippah ve'agmon. Now, Kippah, Rashi says, talks about melachim and shiltonim. These are also government officials. What is Kippah? Those who protect them, chofafim aleim ki kippah. The reality is we have this term, and you think about it, Kippah is not just this. The kippah, the Dat Mikra talks about it. The kippah is a shelter. Why is it a shelter? Think about the word kapot tmarim. Okay. Well, nowadays we use it as a dome. Okay, but a kippah in biblical terms, we have, kapot tmarim, talking about the shade from the top of the date palm is called a kippah. Okay, so he's taking away those who provide the big shelter and also the agmon. The Radak quotes the agmon as being the reed, something that is a smaller lower kind of protection as well. What he's saying, all leadership, all protection of the Jews are going to be removed from them at once. Yom echad. Zaken unasu panim hu harosh. V'navim or sheker hu hazanav. And now he says, the zaken, the person who has found favor in others, that's the Rosh. Remember, Rosh and Zanav is being destroyed. V'navim or sheker, and the Navi Sheker hu hazanav. That's going to be even the false prophet. Now, what was a false prophet? A false prophet was a prophet who tried to find favor with the ruler by prophesying things that he wanted to hear. Okay, and that's the false prophet. So all of that's going to be gone. Vayu pasuk tedvav me'ashrei ha'am hazeh mat'im, and the me'ashrei ha'am. Here we talk about the ma'ashreim are the madrichim, the people who lead us. Okay, like the word yashar ha'am hazeh mat'im are going to set us astray. U'sharav mevulaim, and those who were led by them, in other words, the common people, are going to be swallowed up. Now, bilua it could be, Rashi says, mevulaim actually is to be lost in a sense, that it's talking about the way they're going to be following. The Radak says, okay, even though, he says, even though the Jews thought that these people were good, nevertheless, the Jews were going to be swallowed up. They're going to be led astray through their evil ideas. Mevulaim, Hirsch says, is a term for moral decay. This is what's going to be happening. Al Kain, al Bachurav lo yismach Hashem. Regarding the young leader, the young people, God will not rejoice. Now, what is God will not rejoice? Simply, he's going to mourn. It's going to be the opposite. Now, it's true that we have opposites. Sometimes not rejoice could just be not rejoicing. Okay, the Dathmi Cross says God is going to mourn them. Why are we picking on the young people? Because the young people are the sense of hope. Even those young people who you were going to say are more idealistic and everything else, God is going to mourn their loss. God will have no mercy on the widow and on the orphan, because all of them are hypocrites and evildoers. The Ibn Ezra says chanef, it means borotov tochora. Okay, that on the outside they seem really good, but inside they seem really bad. V'chol he dover nevala. Everybody, all they're speaking is just nevala. Nevala is they're speaking badly, disgustingly. I don't know how arts go, huh? Like nivel, yeah. V'chol zot lo shava po ba'od yadon netuyah. End of the second stanza. Okay, this still isn't the end of God's wrath because they haven't done tshuva. The third piece is going to be talking about civil war and war versus Yehuda. That the next step, the first step, they were arrogant. The second step, their leadership led them astray and were destroyed. The third step is going to be civil war that's going to occur all in the northern kingdom itself. Ki va'ara ke'esh rish'ah. That ultimately their evil is going to burn like a fire. Shamir v'shayet tochel, the thorn and the thistle will be consumed. Ultimately, when you think about it, the shamir and the shayet, those are the ones who are the lowest and the easiest things to burn. So, in fact, Rav Carmel talks about those who have rebelled and who have sinned. Is another way of saying the shamir v'shayet on this. Then, vatitzat b'sivchei hayar. And then it's going to ignite the thicket of the forest. Now, who is the thickets of the forest? Well, Rashi says dalei ha'am. They're the poor people. It's the lower part of the forest itself. The Radak says no. Radak says fire starts with the kindling, and then it spreads and it consumes the entire the forest. The kindling and the forest is not talking about geographic descriptions. These are the people themselves. It's going to start with the lower and get the higher. Vayit abku geut ashan. And then vayit abku. It's a strange word, vayit abku. We're not really sure where it comes from. The Malbim says it's bilbul seder ashan balioto begova wisham lamata lidei ruach, that the smoke is going to go up and then it'll go down because the winds are just going to it's going to be all mixed in. He says, in essence, vayit abku is related to the word nevuchim, like they're confused. Okay, that the smoke is going to be confused. However, the Mitzudat David says that because of all of the fire, what's going to happen is the Geut Hashan, there's going to be this pillar of smoke is going to go up and up and up. It's going to get until it is going to cover over all the light.
Is this a reference to the shore?
No, it's a reference to destruction. Okay, Hirsch says that the word Vayit Abku is related to the Shoresh Avak, Aleph Bet Kuf, which is to fight. Vayit Abku Geut Ashan, and the smoke is going to fight with itself. Now, his understanding of this is that this is talking about what the consequence, where there's going to be internal civil war that's taking place when all of these attacks are happening. Now, continuing, Bevrat Hashem Tzvakot Ne'atam Aretz. In the anger of HaKodesh Baruch Hu, okay, remember from the Haggadah, Evra, V'zam, B'charon Af, Evra is the anger, okay, Ne'atam Aretz, and we're really not sure what the word Ne'atam means. The Targum Yonatan says that Ne'atam means Charuch, to scorch, okay, God's anger will scorch the earth. The only problem is, it should be Ne'atama, it should be in a feminine form and not a masculine form, and as a result, Rashi then takes a secondary approach and he says, Nigzar, it's going to that this anger of God will reach the earth. Okay. Okay. Not that it will cause the earth, but it will reach the earth. Huh?
About big stuff.
Being isn't that with a tet? No, isn't it with a tet? Yeah. Okay. And Radak says actually that it comes, Natam comes from an Arabic word, which means darkness. That darkness will fall over the word, will fall over the world. We're not really sure. Bevrat Hashem tzvakot netam aretz, vayehi ha'am kema'acholet eish ish elachav lo yachmolu. And the people are going to be consumed. No one is going to have rachmanis on everyone else. Every man for himself. Vayigzor ala yamin v'ra'ev, and they're going to grab to the right, and they'll still be hungry. Vayochal al small v'lo saveu, they're going to eat on the left and they'll not be satisfied. Ish besars ro'o yochel, they'll consume their own limbs. According to Rashi, this is not talking about cannibalism. What this is really talking about is people at this time, they're going to be stealing from this one and stealing from this one, and they're going to ultimately steal from their own families. They're going to be every man for himself at this point. There's going to be total chaos happening in the people. Menashe et Ephraim ve'Ephraim et Menashe. The tribe of Ephraim is going to attack the tribe of Menashe. Menashe is going to attack the tribe of Ephraim. Now, why these two tribes? Because they're brothers. Okay. Yachdav Hemal Yehuda, they're going to then go together and attack Yehuda. Nevertheless, God has not finished because they haven't done tshuva, and God will not, his anger is still present. We will hit the last of these stanzas next week. I will say up front, next week, we're also going to end a little bit early. I have to be out of here by 9:45 next week. I was told that there's a graduation or something next week I have to attend. But we will be meeting again next week. And then after that, we will continually, we'll keep on going into Yeshayahu. It's good to have the Seamers back again in person. Everyone have a very good day.